everybody that could be here. I just want to let you know that we are recording this presentation for those that couldn't be here and those that might want to watch it again. Little housekeeping to get us started. Please, if you could, if you have a chat that you'd like to present to us, put your name and email in that chat so we can communicate with you at a later time. Not too many people in the Zoom right now, but if there becomes a high volume, it'd be great if people muted themselves so that we could make sure the sound quality is better for all of us. And throughout this whole presentation, feel free to add things in the YouTube chat or the Zoom chat, and Rob here will help us navigate those as we go. So let me introduce some people that may be speaking tonight. First, I'd like to introduce Kalina from Chrisman Company, if she could wave. I know that Sean from Tower Pinkster will be speaking some tonight. Jacob from Chrisman Company will be speaking tonight. Maybe Tom, if he needs to chime in. And Rob, if you want to wave, will help us navigate the technology this evening. So I appreciate you all so much helping with the presentation. And I think it's a good time to get started. So Kalina, if you wanted to share your screen, and we will go from there. So it's actually taken us quite a bit to get to this point, which is great. We've thus far been studying our facilities now for approximately 6 months to get a solid understanding of what our needs are so that the board can eventually consider a potential bond issue for May of 21. So there's been facilities assessments. There's been meetings with stakeholders, building leaders, food service, athletics, arts. There's been a community forum in September. We've done one community survey already. And why we're here tonight is to make sure that we take all of that work and start to narrow down our focus so that we can eventually put a proposal in front of the board that they can support and hopefully that the community can support. So tonight's agenda, we're going to go over some of that community feedback from before the survey that was done. We're going to talk about the facility assessment in some detail and the process and prioritization that we've been doing. We'll need some help with that. Potential improvements in scenarios. We've taken all this feedback and narrowed it down into 4 scenarios that we'd love to share with you and get your feedback on. We'll talk a little bit about funding and how the millage funds work and what they can be used for. We definitely want to ask you some discussion questions and get some feedback, and then talk about where we go from here for next steps. So to get us started, we've gotten a great amount of community feedback from our survey. And what Kalina is going to do is go through some of the highlights, talk about some of the things we pulled from that survey, and feel free again to put any questions in the chat. So let me turn it over to Kalina.
Thanks, James. I think my volume's on and everything's good. So we had a really successful first survey. Just want to start this off by saying that this is the first of 2 rounds of surveying that we'll do for the public. This first go around, we collected 310 responses. We really appreciate all of those of you who took the survey and those of you who shared it. Continue doing that, please, with the second survey. That's how we'll get to the right program. You can see on these charts, I'm just going to go quickly through the next few slides, but you can see on these charts how people's responses broke down. Of course, most of the people that responded were parents or grandparents to kiddos in the district, and their responses were reflective of that. The most common comments about our academic facilities were that they were a little dated and that they might not meet the needs of modern teaching environments. Of course, that wasn't true for every building in the district. You've got great building stock and you've got some great spaces, but there was a common thread of maybe we could do a little bit better. This came from not only our community stakeholders, but also our internal stakeholders. As James mentioned, we met with teachers and administrators, district staff from all different departments and all different buildings. And what was really encouraging from an outsider is to hear that their needs and their ideas were very similar to what the survey reflected that the parents felt the needs were. I'm not going to read these comments verbatim because these will be available on the school's website. at the end of the week. So if you guys are data geeks like me, you can go through and comb through these comments and kind of get a feel for what people said. It's very great that the community feels that the school buildings are theirs and that they have access to them. So that was really encouraging to know that they are vested. Many surveys commented on poor pickup and drop-off conditions at some of the elementaries and middle schools. So we were glad to hear that because we felt like that was an area of opportunity as well. The staff was excited that we're going to address some of those major concerns as well. We received a lot of comments on the need to improve the state of the pool, especially for spectators and tennis courts. So athletics were also assessed in this survey and of course in our assessment. Additionally, there was some needs at the tennis facility as far as spectators go as well. Performing Arts Center, you guys have a beautiful facility. It was a really frequent comment discussed that there might be some audio and visual upgrades, not only in the Performing Arts Center itself, but in some of the educational spaces that support those students that perform there. Definitely, the times we live in reinforce the need for technology. It came across really strong in the survey that all of the people who took it felt that technology was one of the leading needs in the district, whether that be through Wi-Fi or Chromebooks. It's going to come out later in some of our other later meetings of what bond funds can and can't pay for. But this survey is a tool that the district can use moving forward with all of your assessment. It doesn't just have to be about the bond. We hope that these needs will ring true past what we do together. More on technology there. This is a question that it's good to get a feel for how people are gauging the bond issue, as we'll call it right now, whether or not they're supportive. 173 of the 300 plus survey responders says yes, they do believe that it is time to consider a bond, and 107 weren't sure. So those weren't sure probably just want to know what we're thinking. So this is incredibly encouraging this early in the game to know that so many people who took the time to take the survey feel like we're on the right track and this is the time to be talking about it. James, I want to turn it over to you to address a couple of these comments, maybe that first one particularly, because some people had a hard time getting into the survey given the current landscape of education.
Yes, I would be happy to. I think I have personally found myself living in the COVID moment, we call it, all the time. That seems to be what drives our day-to-day life, what drives our decisions, what our mental focus is on. That is part of why I enjoy these meetings so much, because it gives us a chance to really look to the future. And we know that the COVID moment will end. And when that does, we want to have state-of-the-art facilities, modern learning spaces, safe, warm, dry, secure environments for our kids, community accessible buildings. And I think that it was a understandable comment that came up on the survey when people are thinking that, we're not fully in school and we have this mixture of online and in person. And, that is true for now. But this bond is about the whole future, decades into the future. And so I'd just like to have people not be afraid to dream a little bit for the future of our kids, and know that this moment will end and we can focus on these positives. It's a pretty exciting time.
Thank you. And I guess that's really wraps up everything we wanted to say about this first survey. Again, I just want to put the tickler out there that there's another one coming at the end of the week.
Great. So let's talk about this funnel diagram, because it really helps visualize what we're trying to do. From the beginning of this bond idea, it was one we wanted to build together with you. We wanted to build it with the community, which is a little different than we've done in the past. In the past, we had very specific needs that we were aware of: a need for a pool, a need for an auditorium, a need for a technology in the field house. And the bond proposals indicated that those were the things the district was hoping for and hoped that the community could support. This time it's a little bit different, because we wanted to build it together. And that starts with a lot of processes along the way. A facilities assessment, which we'll go through a little bit tonight, indicated some of those needs that are seen and some that are unseen. The buildings were studied. We've met, as I said earlier, with numerous stakeholders and had a forum and a survey. And all of this is for a singular purpose, is to narrow our focus through a prioritization process and dreaming a little bit about the future to put that proposal in front of the community and the board that can be supported. And what we'll do next is sort of go through some of those identified needs so that the community is aware of what was discovered upon all of those facilities assessments. So I think we can move to the next one. And what I'll do at this point is turn it over to Sean and Jacob, who can identify some overarching needs and then some specific needs building by building or facility by facility, and share those lists with you. So Sean or Jacob, whichever one would like to take it over.
All right, thank you, James. Just to lay a little bit of groundwork about the facilities assessment, we, as a team, between Chrisman and Tower Pinkster, we had a number of folks that took part in this, and it was a group of construction managers, it was a group of architects, engineers, food service designers, technology designers, really taking a very comprehensive look at the buildings as they sit today. And so this first pass was really meant to identify those things that needed attention, whether it be more immediate types of needs or even a little bit more longer term type needs. As Kalina mentioned, all of this information really serves to help the district creating a long range plan. As we looked at the buildings, there were a number of common themes that were present at all of the buildings. And again, much like Kalina, I don't want to go through item by item here, but maybe just to highlight a few of the key items that we did see. When we think about the educational environment, the classroom furniture, the current classroom furniture is old, outdated, and very, I guess, clunky, for lack of a better word, to move around and really become agile to adjust to the many needs that teachers and students need in today's education. Really just having that ability to quickly change on the fly from a lecture format to small group format is a little bit difficult, and a lot of education time is lost in those transitions. When we look at items like energy efficiency and really helping the district realize additional fund, as the district receives funding from the state and they use that to operate the buildings, what are some of the things that we really can look at to improve the bottom line for the school? And so some of those types of things include replacing outdated HVAC equipment, replacing outdated lighting with new LED lighting technology that really has pretty significant and pretty rapid payoff. Safety and security, really making sure that the entries, cameras, all of those things are up to date and really providing the optimal and safest environment for students and staff. So if we move to the next slide. So at the elementary schools, again, some of these will be commonalities that you just heard from me a minute ago, but in addition, roof repair, upgrades to electrical services. I think one of the things that many of the elementary buildings, being from the 50s and 60s era, they really weren't designed to handle the technology that we have in schools today. So really making sure that there's a robust backbone to power all of those devices and be able to charge those types of devices. So as we went through the assessment, in parallel with that, as Kalina talked a little bit about, we had all of these other types of conversations with many of the district stakeholders. And when we go through those exercises, really the idea is let's start to stretch our vision a little bit, get beyond what you're doing today in your buildings and where is education going for the future? Or, how is the building inhibiting you from really providing the program that you want to provide to students? As I mentioned, in addition to the facilities assessment, these conversations started to talk about program elements. And so the bottom three items that you see these are some of the key program elements that came out of some of these smaller group conversations that we had. In the elementary buildings right now, the gymnasiums and cafeteria are one and the same. That certainly limits the amount of use of that space and limits the flexibility that the school has to really separate those uses throughout the course of the day. Specialty classrooms. So right now, art and music, a lot of those are really not given their dedicated space. So how can we start to think about adding space that really gives them a dedicated spot to teach those types of curriculums to students? And then academic support space. Again, thinking about when these buildings were originally built, the number of people that came in and provided academic support and social support to students, it's certainly a much different landscape that the schools exist in now. And having those spaces, dedicated spaces for those types of professionals to come in and really have impactful environments in working with those students was something that was very important as we talked to staff. So at the middle school, from a facilities assessment perspective, year started to talk more about program elements. The science classrooms were one key item that was brought up many times. And the comment was the spaces that were teaching science and really weren't meant to teach science. They don't have all of the utilities and amenities within that space to allow for the current science curriculum to be delivered to students. So one thought was, what if we add on to the building with a new science wing that provides a classroom space that has more of that flexibility like we talked about, even when we talked about furniture, but in the science classrooms, how can we start to think about those spaces really being able to transition fairly quickly from a lecture to lab type space? And we have a number of examples that we've done throughout our work in K-12 that we have shared with the district and talked through with the district. And those seem to be really nice solutions that could dovetail well with the ideas that were brought up with some of the staff. I think one other thing just to add on the program elements is that the middle school kids, they need room to move. They need room to break out. And as we start to consider maybe some additions, how can other spaces within the building be repurposed to provide a little bit more of that flexibility and openness that are definitely a need within that building?
Okay, so this is where I pick up. Thanks, Sean. Great recap there. So keeping in mind that the slide that Sean started on were building needs that reached across the entire district. I've got a few other facilities that I'm gonna cover here, but this high school list is a list of noteworthy items that are in addition to the slide that Sean started on. So in our community forum and stakeholder meetings leading up to this, there was talk of, some issues with HVAC equipment. There were some concerns about lighting, security, and sound systems and such that all apply to the high school as well that were on Sean's first slide. And these other noteworthy items here, as Kalina and Sean have kind of established here, we're trying not to read every bullet on the slide, but I'll pick a few highlights here. Providing emergency power to the high school, that was a priority item that was discovered in the facility assessment and also brought up in some of our previous discussions. Improving the functionality of the media center, that's been a hot button amongst the community members. So some renovation and improvement to that media center space is definitely on the list. Roof restoration, some site work, ADA compliance. That was another hot button item, I'll call it, for restrooms and toilet facilities. And secured entries that came up very recently, actually, in regard to not only the main entrance, but other entrances within the high school as well. So we've heard you loud and clear on those items. And again, this isn't a complete comprehensive list, but it's a list that captures most of the items. If you want to move to the next slide, Kalina. Three other facilities within the district are identified here, starting with the Early Childhood Center. We have 4 needs identified here that were not on that initial slide. Again, emergency power was identified at the Early Childhood Center. Toilets for specific to the preschool classrooms as a need, and as well as security cameras at that facility. In the district administration building, the replacement of the district-wide phone system. So really, this doesn't apply to only the administration building. This is across the entire district. We just tagged it here with administration because that'll be kind of where the heartbeat of it starts, and then it spreads out from there. And that's not only a want, but not only a want, but a need and a requirement on the state level to upgrade that phone system. Some drainage needs and retention at the exterior of that building, and again, backup power at that facility. And then the transportation building here, there's some maintenance type of stuff needed, repair to the building envelope and roof restoration. Some needs with pavement replacement around that facility. And again, ADA or barrier-free toilet rooms. And then the last area that I'm going to cover here is arts and athletics. So you have some fantastic facilities when it comes to art and athletics, but there are some needs within those facilities, and we not only identified that in our assessment, but we heard quite a bit about this from the community. An example would be the resurfacing the track. The track surfaces have a certain life expectancy, and that's reaching the end of its life now and ready for a replacement. The idea of artificial turf has been thrown out quite a few times now, and that would increase opportunities at the stadium and on that field for more than just football, but band and other athletics and such. Gives you much more playing time and much more usability by going to an artificial field. Tennis courts, that is very, very important in Allegan, and we've recognized that and understand that is a very important priority to replace the courts. Skipping down a few here, the Performing Arts Center, while that is just a beautiful facility, there are some needs there with lighting, stage systems, audio, visual. Some of those systems have some age on them, and we need to look at getting those updated and keep up with the times, if you will. Band and choir sound system, stadium sound system, that's kind of all on the same theme. And then the last couple items here with scoreboards and backboards, scoreboards relative to my high school and middle school, and then motorized backboards at the middle school, and some lighting needs at the field house. So with that, that takes us through the identified needs through all facilities. And it's not unusual for us to go through this process and identify an abundance of needs, along with a number of requests and wants from the community that are all great ideas and things that would serve the district really well. And then we take that list, and we more often than not need to pare it down to align with what the community will support in terms of a bond program. And in this case, we've identified over $100 million in needs. And we'll talk a little bit later on what the expected budget will be, or the amount of money that can be raised within the community through a zero mil increase. And because we're beyond that amount, we've taken the process to start to think about how we could prioritize and develop some scenarios that would come within the range of the proceeds generated by a zero mil increase. But by no means are we complete with that process, and that's why we're all here today. And we're reaching out to the community again to talk through this with the community and really work with this whole group to go through this prioritization process. And that takes you back to the funnel that James had talked through earlier at kind of what stage in the process we're in. And we're now at that prioritization process here. So with that said, if we go to the next slide, I think James is going to walk us through some scenarios here that we've kind of outlined and laid out for discussion. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you both, Sean and Jacob. Very well said and set the stage for the next step. The reason we went through all of that background was because we felt it was important for this group to know how we got to this point. But we have, sort of some scenarios to share with you that will help hopefully get your thinking going. And then after I present sort of the 4 scenarios, we'd like to open it up to some questions and comments from you about them, some things you like about them, some things you may not like about them, or some, I guess we would say, concerns or questions you may have that you feel should be answered for each of them. So we'll start with scenario number 1. And scenario number 1 indicates that the facilities assessment has some needs that were prioritized as a top priority. And these would be the warm, safe, dry elements and prioritized athletic and arts needs included. And so scenario 1 is sort of that baseline. And it's important to remember the difference between facilities assessment needs and things that we might want to vision and dream about for programmatic change. And so scenario 1 does not indicate programmatic change, but it does address all of the items that are prioritized on the facilities assessment. So that would be scenario number 1. Scenario number 2 would include all of those elements from scenario number 1. Then we start getting into some programmatic changes that we discussed earlier, like what would it look like to put a science edition at the middle school? How would that open up opportunities for kids for STEM? How would that open up other locations in the building for movement? And then you start to think about, well, what if we were able to add a gymnasium onto the elementaries that would be sort of an addition or a renovation that would improve those programs in the elementary buildings. So scenario 1, facility assessment needs. Scenario 2 starts to get into some programmatic change that would be needed for the district to move to the modern educational environments. Additionally, if you're talking about types of programmatic change, there is a certain topic that's come up, I would say, for maybe a decade or more in Allegan Public Schools, and it resurfaced again in the reconfiguration conversation from last year. And the topic is grade centers. And that topic as an educational model for our district has come up so often that it is important for us to throw scenarios that address that concern on our list. And so scenario 3 would, again, have those prioritized items from earlier, including maybe that addition at the middle school. But then we start to think about grade centers. And we start to think about, in our current model, having 3 elementary schools, all of different sizes, accommodating a grade center configuration we've analyzed to no end in the past and realized our current configuration would not allow for that for many reasons. One of them would be a family could potentially have 3 transitions in elementary school, going from an early L to a middle L to an upper L, 3 different principals, 3 different staffs, potentially kids of all different ages, and having to go to all of those locations all over the district would be very difficult for some families. So we started to think about, if we're able to dream a little bit, let's talk about a scenario in which we take a couple of our schools, Pine Trails and Westward, and renovate them and add on to them to provide an upper and lower L for our community, which would have us repurpose Dawson Elementary for community needs, potentially mid-level housing. I've had some discussions about other opportunities I'll get into a little bit later in this presentation. So scenario 3 is a scenario in which we add and renovate to create that grade center priority for our district that we've been thinking about for a very long time. And then scenario 4 goes even further and thinks about, well, what if we were able to have an elementary campus, one elementary school that would feel like two? It would have an upper and a lower side to it, and it would allow for quite a few opportunities, grade centers. It would allow us to have some food service savings. It would allow us to have some other needs that might meet the needs of the community. And those 4 scenarios throughout this entire process, we've narrowed, and it's time to bring these to you. The question, of course, becomes, are these affordable? Are these under the amount of money that we could raise with a no-mill bond? And the answer is, with a prioritization process, yes. And I think the slides can indicate the cost on the right, that through a community process, they would be achievable financially. What we want to hear from you about is, are they achievable from a perception standpoint, from a desire of the community standpoint, by answering your questions and getting your feedback. But before I do that, scenario 4, for example, begs the question of what would we do in that scenario? If we're able to, and the community desires an elementary campus, what would we do with our existing facilities? I think that's a valid question and an important question. Preliminarily, I've had some discussions with some city and township community members, and the need for mid-level housing for our community is huge. We have some needs for some elder care and nursing home facilities. And while those conversations are just preliminary, there are definitely opportunities for us to utilize our assets, our properties, to aid the community in one way or another. So haven't taken that further without hearing from you, but know that those things are being considered, and we know that would be an important piece of that proposal if scenario 4 indeed was the way to go. So that brings us to a point where I think it's important to talk to you, the community, the members in this forum, and then via the survey, is, what scenario fits, what best serves our students and our future vision long-term for our district, and kind of turn it over for some comments or questions, potentially, scenario by scenario. So it's a good opportunity to look at scenario 1 and ask the question to those viewers that are in the room, what are some questions, some concerns, some positives, some things that you might think are uncertain? Either throw those things in the chat or feel free to unmute and say them out loud. What are we thinking?
This is Michelle. I'm wondering about, in this prioritization, where the middle school labs and science area falls in. How come that wasn't one of the prioritized ones?
You mean in this scenario 1?
Yep.
That's a good question, and maybe Sean and Jacob can help me out. But scenario 1 would indicate that those existing facility needs that were identified would be the ones wrapped up into this scenario. Okay. And adding a wing or programmatic change helped us sort of drive that focus for scenario 2. Okay. So if Jacob or Sean wants to chime in about, why maybe that wasn't in priority 1 and maybe explain that process a little bit, that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, James. Michelle, really the basis of the facilities assessment is to look at the building as it sits today, not necessarily judge where it might be falling short programmatically, but where it might be falling short from say mechanical systems or electrical systems or interior finishes. So in this scenario, it's really just checking the box on all of those items and updating those items, but making really no leap into the future as to, some of the educational needs of spaces and programmatic needs that might exist. So that was really kind of the focus of this first scenario and the focus of the facilities assessment to begin with.
I can just say as a community member, if I saw this, I am a community member, obviously, but if I saw this as a presentation, I would say, okay, great, you're going to keep my child warm and safe and dry. Love that. But what about their academic? That's left out there. And so on the surface, this here doesn't, it kind of reprioritizes the athletics, or it would appear maybe to. That's likely not the intent at all, but it would appear that the athletics and arts would be prioritized over STEM, all that academic piece. So it's just more about the presentation than anything, how I think a response might happen.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point, to have on there that some of those athletic and arts needs are prioritized, and that we're going to, maybe make the buildings, like you said, warm, safe, and dry. I think the question you're asking is, where are the programmatic or academic,
Right.
changes or vision? And I think that's an excellent point. And certainly you can talk more about scenario one, but I think that sort of drives why we've created these other scenarios, because we anticipated a little bit that some may think, I would like to dream and vision about the future beyond just fixing things up, right? So I think that leads us sort of to the next one, and then even the next ones after that. So let's talk a little bit about scenario two. Oversights, questions, concerns, things that might be on your mind related to scenario two, which would provide some of the things from scenario one and some programmatic change that might help us vision for the future. What are some thoughts about that? Trying to use my old teacher wait time tactic to see if someone wants to chime in.
I'm not going to be the only one that talks, right?
Well, there unfortunately not many community members were able to join live, and so Michelle, you're certainly not taking up anyone else's time. I want you to feel free to go ahead and share your thoughts. We're so glad that you're here.
Okay. I was shocked, honestly, that at the cost point when you shared all 4 scenarios, and part of it for me went, you might as well just blow past scenario 2 to me, because it doesn't really feel like much bang for the buck when I know that 3 has a lot more bang for that buck. That's about the same cost.
Yep. No, I appreciate that feedback as well. We were kind of trying to gauge it as you can see, as the scenarios change, the degree of change to our community and our vision changes. So some people may be comfortable and excited about that, and some people may be a little uncomfortable with that. So I'm glad to hear you say that, you're not uncomfortable kind of dreaming and thinking about what the future might look like. That's exciting. So yep, point very well taken. So and certainly anybody else on scenario 2, but if not, we could go right into one of the others.
So James, maybe one thing that I know that as we look at things, it's about how much do you want to move the needle in the district, and I think that's kind of what Michelle's getting to, is it pushing it far enough? I think maybe another thing, as designers and construction managers, we look at the buildings, and when we certainly like a good challenge, but oftentimes we do find that there are sacrifices in keeping as much of a building as scenario 2 might be suggesting. Certainly something that we can continue to work with, but oftentimes as we hear about some of the future programmatic needs, trying to insert new program into old bones is a little difficult from time to time, and sometimes there are sacrifices that have to happen. Not necessarily saying that this is a bad solution, but I think as we start thinking further and trying to identify challenges and benefits to each, that certainly can be a challenge from time to time.
Yep, very good point.
One of the things too that I think that as a community member watching it,
think it's okay to maybe move on to the next. So scenario 3, I think we talked about a little bit.
James,
What are some
James,
thoughts?
if I could, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Michelle was speaking there, and it's for some reason, Michelle, your mic is very quiet.
Oh. I was hearing her loud and clear earlier.
Yeah, we've lost you now, Michelle.
Did you become unplugged, perhaps? It might take a little longer, but if we can't hear you, feel free to type it in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah, while Michelle's maybe trying to fix some of those technical difficulties, is anyone else feel like they would like to chime in or discuss scenario 3 a little bit deeper? I think while we're waiting, maybe one thing that is worth discussing is of all of the schools, you know, why might we be considering repurposing, you know, Dawson versus some of the others? And if I recall, that was in many ways based upon the geographic footprint at Dawson does not really allow for some of these additions and renovations really to function. And please, Sean or Jacob, correct me if I'm wrong, but that sort of drove a piece of that scenario, correct?
That's correct. You know, and now I have my construction manager hat on, and I can't help myself here, James. But just to say that the Dawson, repurposing Dawson, as you said, was driven by the constraints of that site. But there was also a lot of communication with the community about parent drop off and pickup and busing and such, and Pine Trails and West Ward, to the point Sean made earlier about working within the confines of the old bones of a building, or maybe the confines of an existing site. There are certainly some challenges associated with additions and renovations to Pine Trails and West Ward, and repurposing what's left of those that make this a maybe less than ideal, but still a very good solution, but less than ideal and challenging to implement. And that's where I say I've got my construction manager's hat on, because you need to think about how do you phase all this and continue to have Allegan Public Schools operate effectively and efficiently while we're renovating and adding on.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point too. And for the community members that may not know, there's a term I learned throughout this process called swing space. And swing space means that, do you have the space in your district to maneuver children around to continue to get their education while we do work in the building to renovate it to the vision that we're hoping for. And in our district, that would be a pretty enormous challenge if that was required. So I think it's worth stating that there are some positives and some drawbacks, as there probably are to all of the scenarios.
James, I think as we get ready to probably transition to scenario 4, I think one of the questions that we also had relative to this option was the fact that you still have 2 sites. And so if you have a family that has a kid in kindergarten and you have a child who's in 4th grade, and you're the one that's the transportation in the morning or the afternoon, we heard that through the first some of our early conversations with community members, and that was, how do we manage that? How do we navigate that? So I think in this case, it's 2 buildings. Is this too much of a challenge? I guess that's more of a question for the community and maybe some of those folks that have children that would be at multiple buildings. I don't know what that answer is, but I'm curious if there's anybody on the call that might be able to respond to that.
Yeah, I would be as well.
really bummed out that we can't hear Michelle. I wonder, Michelle, if you'd want to try to sign out and sign back in to see if that worked, because I can see you're trying to speak.
In the meantime, Michelle was offering some advice that mentioning some educational goals or anticipated outcomes would be great for any presentation that we do to the community or do for the community.
Yeah, I saw that in the chat, and I think that makes a lot of sense and helps guide the conversation of, facilities needs versus programmatic and educational vision. And that's why we wanted to discuss, if we could, the grade center concept, which would have some educational and academic goals wrapped around it in terms of why that might be a better academic model than our current K-5 model, which I also think is very good. But the ability to get all of the teachers of a grade level together, collaborating to have a team approach over time would have, I think, a significant impact. So that topic came up in the past when we talked about grade centers and the ability for planning and collaboration and intervention and data analysis and all of those very powerful indicators for education that we would be able to bring to life in a grade center configuration. So to Michelle's point, I think that's very well said. So thank you for that, Michelle. And I know Michelle was able to sign back in, I saw. How's the mic working? Are we able to hear? Not looking good? Oh, good. I see Angela has discussed a little bit about the traffic backup. And that's a really good point that, if some of these things would have neighborhood and traffic implications, if we're funneling more students instead of into 3 schools into 2, that would mean more people and would potentially mean more traffic. And we did think about that a little bit, and that might be a fairly interesting segue into scenario 4, because one of the concerns that we had was that pickup and drop off was a very consistent theme throughout all of the community perception surveys we've done in the past and the community forum survey related to this proposal. So that traffic consideration is very real, Angela, and I appreciate you putting that into the chat. And so when we considered all of those things, we felt it would be prudent to put an additional scenario for discussion up to the community. But clearly it's one that is, when we talk about moving the needle or revisioning the district, this would be the one that would have the greatest sort of change impact on us. And so as we talked about earlier, it would have all of those facility assessment items, the prioritized ones. It would have that science STEM edition at the middle school, which would be exciting. But this one would consolidate all three elementaries into one elementary building that would have an upper and a lower side to it. Obviously there's some considerations for traffic there too. So we'd have to think about, well, where might that go? I think that if done correctly, some of those multi-site pickup drop-off concerns could be alleviated. If you go back to thinking about scenario 3, it gets us some concerns about that pickup and drop-off traffic since the sites would be what they are currently. So again, we would love to hear some feedback related to scenario 4. It would be fine to put that into the chat, and we would love to have anyone on the call feel like they'd like to speak up and ask anything or share some concerns about that. Have some things shown up in the chat, Rob?
Yes. So Angela asked, do you envision a completely new elementary if it is combined? And then I'll let you talk about that one, and then we'll go to Michelle's after that.
Sure. Scenario 4 would be a new building, a new upper lower L on a site, and it would be a scenario that would essentially have an elementary campus and hopefully address some of those concerns that we've talked about. But again, what we need to hear from the community is, are there reasons that would be very palatable and something that would be exciting and accepted? Or are there things that might be not palatable and things the community may be concerned about that we should think about when we're trying to narrow our scenarios down to the one that we're hopefully going to propose? So that's what tonight is about. It's about hearing from you. Positives are great, but also things that are questions are great. But these are good. I would be willing to entertain certainly more of those, Rob, if you said there are some in there.
And Michelle, she brought up, if we move to one elementary school, would it limit the possibility of expansion in the future?
Great question. And I think I would love to maybe turn that over to Sean and Jacob as well in terms of that, the process that would go into that. I know you all have experience with that. And how do we make the decision related to not building something too small and hoping for more kids to move into town and making sure that those things can be accommodated for? Would you guys like to maybe talk about that?
Absolutely. I think it makes sense to mention also, as we consider new buildings, we did have one of the focus groups that I mentioned earlier was a group that really was responsible for helping us think about that vision. And these really represent providing the maximum opportunity for the Allegan students. As far as flexibility and expansion, that's certainly something that we always want to keep in mind, even though we may be designing a building for today and for into the near future. We know that just through all of our experience that we've seen a number of examples from the past that really haven't thought much about that. So we always keep that on our radar, I think, between the design and the construction management teams. How can we continue to prep that site to allow for flexibility into the future? This is a significant investment by the community, and we want to honor that and make sure that it stands the test of time, not only physically, but also programmatically.
Great. That was a great question. I'm glad it was asked. Are there some others?
Nothing yet, but we can wait.
Sure. Yeah, I'd like to give people an opportunity. It's a lot to consider. And I know sometimes when people hear quite a bit of information and then we ask them for feedback, it's really important sometimes to have processing time. And some people maybe will have thoughts and questions and concerns and positives that'll come up later. And that's great. That's why we're going to do the follow-up survey. And so it's certainly okay if those questions and positives and considerations do not necessarily come up immediately right now, but we certainly want to give you the opportunity if some things are on your mind while we're together today.
I guess I would just reiterate what you said a minute ago, James, that these are really exciting options to start to think about, but that's from an outsider looking in perspective. What are the blind spots that, as we analyze it from our perspective, are there blind spots that we need to be considerate of that the community has some reservations about, say, an option like this or a scenario 3 even?
Well, and I certainly know we have some staff members, so it's certainly appropriate if any staff members also happen to be community members. I don't want you to feel as though you can't chime in. I know you've had your meetings and opportunities and stakeholder meetings in the past, but if anything new or different has dawned upon you during this conversation, feel free. Even though you work for the district, it's okay to chime in if you have something on your mind. Well, I do see that additional chat came in, and it does trigger some good conversation. I think, Tom, thank you for that. There's some things that one building does allow for that might be efficiencies for the district. One of the things we've talked about before as a district is managing class sizes and the ability to evenly distribute students among a number of teachers, which is much easier to do in a grade center configuration. And that model would help with that. There's certainly some operational savings with food service. Right now, we do cook the food at one location and then send it to the other schools via a van. And by the time it gets there, it does tend to maybe not be as good as it was right when it was fresh. So there's some really good health and nutritional needs that could be met for kids. There's some other things like landscaping, snow plowing, mowing, efficiencies that are built in. And anytime you can consider those efficiencies for the district, that's general fund dollars that are saved that can be repurposed for kids. And so that shouldn't go without saying that there are some opportunities there in ways that may not immediately come to mind. So thank you for triggering that, Tom.
One of our wonderful principals just had to share that she's excited for the opportunity to improve our district, improving our educational environments, and also perhaps the effect that it will have on the economy.
Yeah, I agree. A community the size of Allegan is the school is the hub of that community in so many ways. And to want to have families to come live here and build our community together, to be able to provide excellent school facilities for our community is enormous help. So thanks for saying that, Mrs. Kassar.
Angela brings up a concern for lower elementary parents about safety walking to school with the location of the buildings and obviously crossing busy streets.
Yes, this is a theme that's come up for a very long time, and to be completely honest, a very challenging one to solve without some help from a bond proposal of this nature. Because if you think about, westward, all exits lead to Vernon Street, and Vernon is not a large street. And right now, to have cars parked and pick up and drop off the way it is something the building has to manage at a high level to keep it safe. And they do that, but it is not always easy. Similar to Pine Trails, all roads lead to Bridge. And that again can create some congestion when buses and family traffic's trying to get in and out. I do think that's maybe what Angela is alluding to, and if not, please clarify. But those are some very real concerns. We've done some analysis and also determined that there's not that many kids that walk to school anymore that once did, and that does increase the traffic in our buildings that can create that additional safety concern I think you're referring to. So thank you for bringing that up.
Casey from the YouTube chat asked, where would the elementary complex be located?
Yes, great question. That's something that we want to kind of see through our survey process if this is a palatable idea for our community. And when we know if it is, and if that's really the direction, then we need to think about some sites that might be opportunities. There's some property available near the middle and high school. There's some property that we own on Pine Trails campus that is currently ours. Maybe there's some other options that we could consider and analyze that would be a good fit for our community. So to say we've gone as far as other than just some of the just well-known sites that are empty here in the community that are commonly known, have not gotten to the point to analyze that before coming to you all and seeing if that's something you might be hoping we do.
And to Abigail, just offered an opinion that, you know, how this can improve the district and hopefully maintain the families that live here, but also encourage perhaps some new families to move in.
Yeah, thank you, Abby. I agree. I think facilities matter. I know when people see our pool and our auditorium, they are wowed. They almost sometimes cannot believe these gems exist in little old Allegan. And when I see people's faces light up when they see those facilities, it is unbelievable. When I see people enter our field house and think, you have 4 tennis / basketball courts and a track, and some districts don't have an auxiliary gym, and we have this. It is something special to behold. And let's be honest, none of those things happen without the community. All of that was bond supported, and it's just a testament to the people, how much they care about our kids, how much they care about our community. And that's what we're hoping for again, that we can continue to build that vision for the future. Anything else coming in, Rob, that we should be aware of before we maybe move toward maybe wrapping it up?
I think we can move on.
Okay, well, thank you for navigating that and keeping track of the chat and the YouTube channel so that I know what's on people's minds. I appreciate that. So we should talk about sort of next steps again. Oh, but before that, thank you for reminding me. Let me turn it over to Amy Chrisman to talk a little bit again so the community is aware of how this funding and mills work for us. So thanks, Amy. Go ahead.
Yep. So this kind of brings us back to that question of why now. So this is just kind of a graphic to show. So the yellow line indicates the descending yellow line shows what the current 7.55 mil levy will look like over the next 20 years based on the current voter approved debt levels. So what's happening is we're getting to the point in the current debt where our principal and interest payments each year are requiring less and less mills to be levied to meet those payments. And of course, by law, we're only allowed to levy the amount of voter approved debt necessary to meet those principal and interest payments. So with that being said, what the red line indicates would be if we were successful in having the voters approve what we refer to as a no mill increase. So the district could remain at the current 7.55 mills. And as you note on the top of the slide, that 7.55 continuation will result in an approximately $83.75 million that we would be able to generate for the next, the bond would go out about 24.9 years to be exact. So yeah, the district is in a very good place with its bonding levels right now that would allow us to do this. So.
And I will say a big reason for that is the person who just spoke. As we stated at the board meeting this week, our refunding process, similar to refinancing your home, Amy engaged in a process to refund existing bond debt that's going to save the taxpayer approximately $3.6 million over time. And the fact that Amy's willing to do the work and analyze that and always be looking for opportunities to save our community is a testament to why we're here, why we are able to even have this conversation. So it's exciting, but it has to do with the district over a period of decades managing their facilities and debt level extremely responsibly. So I'm very happy about that, and very happy that we could come to you with a proposal that does not raise the taxes of our community at all. It's a very exciting opportunity. Thank you, Amy, for sharing that.
Yep.
So a little bit of history and then a little bit of the future. So, we've done the meetings we discussed and the assessments. On September 23rd, we had our first forum. And on the 24th, we put out a survey and brought that to you today with some scenarios. So we'll follow this up with a survey as well that's a little more pointed and specific now. As you can see, we're continuing to narrow the vision and focus. We'll come again to another community forum, number 3, on November 11th. And then at the board workshop in November, we're planning on bringing the scope of the project to the board. By that point, we would have had so many stakeholder meetings and community forums and surveys. We'll feel very informed and we'll feel like it's truly something that we built together. And I think that certainly makes it a lot more likely for success. So I'm excited. I don't know if anyone else had any sort of final comments, but I want to say how excited I am to have this opportunity, especially during such a challenging time. It's so wonderful to talk about the future and something positive. Anyone else with anything to add?
James, I'll just add something real quick as a little plug. For the few people that were here tonight, we're going to post this video on the school's website. If you could tell people how great it was and how entertained you were all night, that'd be awesome. And just encourage them to watch it, because the survey without context is only going to be as good as it can be. So this is going to be available for people to view, and we just want you to share that on social media and just talk about it. It would be great for the effort. Yeah,
that would be wonderful. Get more people educated on the process and the vision, and start building that excitement. So thank you, team, for being here, from Tower and Chrisman and Rob and Amy and some staff members that were here. I appreciate that. And community members that were able to make it, thank you so much for being a part of the process and letting your voice be heard. It does matter, trust me. So we'll sign off. Have a wonderful night. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.